Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're going to deconstruct the United States' most famous, most revered, and honestly, probably its most misunderstood document. Yep, we're talking about the Declaration of Independence.
But to kick things off, let's talk about the date. We all celebrate July 4th, 1776, right? Independence Day. Well, shockingly, the Continental Congress actually voted to declare independence on July 2nd. And the physical document itself? Most delegates didn't even sign the thing until nearly a month later, on August 2nd. So the 4th of July was really just the day the final wording was approved and sent off to the printer. Crazy, right?
Okay, so here's our roadmap for unpacking the real story today. We're going to cover the road to rebellion, drafting the document, anatomy of the text, the dangerous signing, and finally, an evolving legacy. Let's dive right into part 1, the road to rebellion. You know, the 13 colonies didn't just wake up one morning and calmly decide to break away from the most powerful empire on Earth. It was an absolute pressure cooker environment, and the sheer speed of how it all escalated is just staggering. In April 1775, blood is shed at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Then, the very next month, the Second Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia. Fast forward to January 1776, Thomas Paine drops his wildly popular pamphlet, Common Sense. That makes this passionate case for independence and really blows the doors off the open debate among the colonists. By June 1776, Richard Henry Lee formally proposes a resolution to dissolve all political connection with Great Britain. So the clock was ticking incredibly fast, and that political point of no return, we had officially crossed it.
Moving right along to part 2, drafting the document. So Congress realizes they need a formal, written explanation to justify their actions to the rest of the world. On June 11th, they appoint what became known as the Committee of Five to draft this declaration. Now, this group included some absolute heavy hitters: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert R. Livingston, Roger Sherman, and a relatively young guy from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson. The committee generally thought the outspoken John Adams should be the one to write it, but Adams specifically persuaded Jefferson to hold the pen. He reportedly told him that he was, frankly, the much better writer. So Jefferson secludes himself in a rented room in Philadelphia and gets right to work. Now, what's really interesting about this is that Jefferson later admitted the Declaration didn't actually contain any entirely original ideas. He was basically synthesizing existing philosophies. Just take a look at the text comparison here. Weeks earlier, George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights, stating all men are by nature equally free and independent. Jefferson adapted this, along with the natural rights philosophies of English thinker John Locke, into his now famous preamble, all men are created equal. He basically captured the prevailing spirit of the American mind at the time and just elevated it with brilliant, enduring prose.
Okay, part 3, anatomy of the text. If we zoom in on the actual words, we often think of the Declaration as just this purely philosophical manifesto, but its 5-part structure reveals it's meticulously crafted. It's actually a lot like a legal indictment. First up, you have the introduction, explaining exactly why a separation is necessary. Second is the preamble, which lays out that philosophy of natural rights we just talked about. Third is the indictment of King George III. Fourth, the failed warnings to their British brethren. And fifth, the conclusion, which formally resolves to become independent states. I actually want to focus on step 3 for a second, the indictment. The bulk of the document is actually a highly specific list of exactly 27 grievances against King George III. 27! Jefferson lists out how the king quartered troops among them, cut off their trade, and imposed taxes without their consent. So this wasn't just them complaining. This was designed as an airtight legal argument to prove the king's absolute tyranny to a candid world. Let's move to part 4, the dangerous signing. Zooming back out to that physical room in Philadelphia, the stakes literally could not have been higher. Signing this document was quite literally signing a death warrant. Under British law, this was an act of high treason, and the punishment for that was torture and hanging. Consider this bit of really dark humor from Benjamin Harrison of Virginia to Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, right there at the signing table. Harrison, who was quite a large man, told the diminutive Gerry, "I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we are all hung for what we are now doing. From the size and weight of my body, I shall die in a few minutes." It got a brief smile in the room, sure, but the terrifying reality of what they were actually doing was completely undeniable. It's also super important to note that the final signed text wasn't exactly what Jefferson originally wrote. His initial draft actually contained a really vigorous, passionate condemnation of the transatlantic slave trade. But Congress debated it and ultimately deleted that entire section. Why?
Well, to appease delegates from South Carolina and Georgia who were heavily reliant on the slave trade. Basically, the unity of the new nation was prioritized over a universal application of liberty.
Now, the sheer paradox of slave owners signing a document claiming all men are created equal while actively removing condemnations of slavery, that was not lost on people at the time. Consider this absolutely blistering critique from an English abolitionist named Thomas Day in 1776. He wrote, "If there be an object truly ridiculous in nature, it is an American patriot signing resolutions of independency with the one hand and with the other brandishing a whip over his affrighted slaves. The hypocrisy of the document was recognized the very moment the ink dried."
Finally, Part 5, An Evolving Legacy. Over the next 2 centuries, those incredibly potent words took on a life of their own. They were often weaponized by marginalized groups to demand the very rights they were initially denied. Fast forward to 1863, right at the height of the American Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln completely repurposed the Declaration in his famed Gettysburg Address. He viewed it not just as a historical separation document, but as the actual moral standard through which we should interpret the Constitution itself. By emphasizing that all men are created equal, he reframed the survival of the entire nation around this one core unifying proposition. And this brilliantly illustrates how the text became a true blueprint for equality. In 1848, at the Seneca Falls Convention, early women's rights advocates like Elizabeth Cady Stanton demanded true political and social equality. And they did it by mimicking the 1776 text almost exactly in their Declaration of Sentiments. They just added 2 absolutely crucial words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. A century later, the civil rights movement anchored its demands for racial justice directly to these unfulfilled promises. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stood in Washington, D.C. and told the world, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." He used their own founding words to call for an end to discrimination. And that expanding promise of liberty just continued to be invoked across generations. In 1978, Harvey Milk, a trailblazing leader in the LGBTQ+ rights movement, echoed those exact identical sentiments. He said, "All men are created equal, and they are endowed with certain inalienable rights. No matter how hard you try, you cannot erase those words from the Declaration of Independence." The words written by an imperfect committee in 1776 had truly become the universal language of human rights. So, which leaves us with one final profound question to ponder today as we wrap up this explainer. Have the promises of the Declaration of Independence been fully realized today, or is the legacy of this incredible document still being written by each new generation? Think about that as you reflect on the anatomy of this remarkable revolution. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and keep asking questions.